It appears we are finally waking up from woke. I'm sure you feel it. Wokeness is collapsing all around us. In a few years, it will seem like a bad nightmare, a collective madness that overtook the left all over the West, especially in the Anglosphere, and corroded liberal thought and liberal society from within. Those who still believe in the liberal values must now pick the left up from the ruins, give it a new direction. In this video, I will try to offer a few basic principles I believe should guide us in its reconstruction. The first problem is that while a lot of people now admit that wokeness destroyed the left, they can't even define what wokeness is. They've allowed it to enter their worldview without even noticing, and now they can't tell it apart from liberal thought. You can find on my channel many videos analyzing and defining wokeness for the past 9 years, so here I'm just going to give a very succinct definition. Wokeness is the belief that humans are naturally completely equal to each other, and would naturally live in equality, but at some point in the past, a power structure was imposed on them, a structure that divided them into two groups. It then assigned characteristics to both groups, conditioning their members to assume those characteristics, in a way that would make one group dominate the other. This is an injustice, and the only way to achieve equality, and thus justice and peace, is to bring down the power structure. Thus, woke feminists believe that human males and females are completely equal in their abilities, and would naturally live in equality, but a power structure called the patriarchy was imposed on them, assigning masculine traits to males and feminine traits to females, in a way that made males strong and dominant and females weak and subordinate. Woke racialists believe that all humans are naturally equal, but white-skinned people imposed on them a structure called whiteness that divided them into races and gave advantage to the white race. Woke anti-Zionists believed that the Middle East was a paradise in which everyone got along, until the Jews came and imposed Zionism on everyone, plunging the region into oppression and war. Woke anti-imperialists believe that the world can live in peace if it wasn't for American imperialism imposing itself on everyone. And so forth. This is a really stupid and childish way to look at things, and if an 8-year-old would show that kind of logic, we would smack it out of them. But this is exactly the logic that overtook the left. I know it sounds like I am dumbing it down, but no, I've looked long into it, and there's really no more to it than that. It came from the academy, starting in the 1980s, and in the early 2010s it spread across social media. Usually, when you encounter such phenomena, you find that the social media representation is a gross simplification of people who simply don't understand the ideas that they believe they are espousing. 10 years ago, many thought that wokeness was just that, silly students who take what their professors tell them and interpret it in a very shallow way. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized that the higher you go, the dumber it gets. The students usually mixed wokeness with other ideas, so they actually weren't as stupid as the professors. The professors represent the logic of wokeness in its purity, in all its simplistic glory. They just use a lot of academic mumbo-jumbo to make it sound clever. To see if your mind has been infected by wokeness, here's a simple test. Supposing I told you that maybe the reason why some ethnic groups are financially better than others is because they are biologically more fit to perform the more lucrative jobs. How did your brain react to this assertion? If you were appalled and outright rejected it, it means you've gone woke. If you agree to it, it means you've gone extreme right. The reasonable position would be to say that we don't know if it's true, so we shall continue to look for other reasons for the financial disparities, and in the meantime, refrain from passing judgment on society, or on those ethnic groups. This should be pretty obvious, but wokeness managed to persuade many people that there's something wrong and shameful with this position. I've been fighting it for a decade now, from the perspective of a liberal who wants to save the left. We always warn that if we don't, the right will take over and impose some conservative values that we don't like. Well, This has now happened. The right took over the US and will probably take over other Western countries and dominate for a while. And the American right is not criticizing wokeness in the nuanced way that we do, but in a very heavy-handed way. They are also using the toxic term woke to label things that are not woke, pretty much any kind of left-wing thought. It is possible that we are on the cusp of a new era of McCarthyism. We'll see if this happens. In any case, liberals should not go around feeling depressed that they failed to prevent it. This was inevitable. When a political camp is taken over by ideological extremism, you can never change it by talking sense into those in power. They feel like they are righteous and invincible and refuse to listen. You can only wait for them to crash and burn, and then you can rebuild. Now that it has happened, here are the principles I believe should guide us in rebuilding. 1. Listen to the people. First and foremost, understand that times have changed. There has always been a belief that the masses are stupid and need the clever elites to guide them, or society will collapse. This belief directed those in power to control the amount of power and information given to the masses, and it was also believed that it is all right to lie to them for their own good, what is known as a noble lie. Mass media, beginning in the 19th century, gave more power and information to the masses, but was still controlled by the financial elites. Since mass media was limited in the amount of information it could give in a single newspaper or broadcast, it developed the mentality of a gatekeeper, deciding what would be good for the masses to know and care about. Social media changed all that. Everyone now has the power to broadcast information, and everyone has access to all those countless sources of information. We can no longer control what the people know, and we need to adjust. Personally, I believe that the wisdom of the masses is greater than any other wisdom, and should be the thing that guides us. It is what Rousseau called the general will. You know, Rousseau? The one who is supposed to be the father of leftist thought? The presumption of anyone, or any group of people, to know what is best for all the rest is hubris of the highest order that always proves to be wrong. It is best to let the masses decide what is good for the collective. Even when they make a mistake, the collective then learns from that mistake and changes course, whereas when the elites make a mistake, they usually double down to prove they weren't wrong. The left, in recent years, moved further and further away from the masses, and needs to turn around. Even if you disagree that the collective knows best, you must realize that you really have no choice. Any attempt to deny information from the masses, or to lie to them for their own good, will be exposed on social media, and cause them to distrust you. And if you try to impose policy that goes against the general will, you will eventually fall. So, first of all, the left needs to stop thinking that it knows better. If the masses voted against you, you need to change your ways. If you think public opinion is wrong about something, try to correct it, but do it not by talking down to people, but by talking to them. Break out of the mass media bubble you've been living in, that no longer represents anyone but the elites, and go on social media. You will become a lot more knowledgeable. I know it seems like the internet made people more ignorant and stupid, but that's only because it gave all the ignorant and stupid people a way to be heard. As a whole, the populace has actually become a lot more educated and savvy because of the internet. This principle should always be applied, even when the masses express a morally repugnant opinion. Two recent cases in America come to mind. One is the January 6th attack on Capitol Hill. The other is the murder of the drug company CEO. Both of them generated a lot of online support. They were both immoral acts, and should be unequivocally condemned. But we should also realize that the mass support did not come because the people suddenly decided that murder and mob violence are legitimate. It comes from a place where people feel that those in power don't listen to them, and the only way to get them to pay attention is to scare them with violence. This pain has to be addressed, and you start addressing it by listening to what is hurting those people. 2. The right is not an enemy. Continuing from the theme of not assuming you hold the truth, understand that there is merit in right-wing views. A healthy society needs a liberal left-wing that criticizes and attempts to correct its values, and a conservative right-wing that tries to defend and preserve them. Both sides need to realize that the other side holds the same basic values as they do, wants democracy just as much as them, and just disagrees on the ways to achieve it. The current ideological polarization made us drift away from this basic principle. Again, it goes back to what we discussed in point 1. Because people generally believe that the masses are stupid, every political camp believes that the other side is brainwashed by the elites, and therefore holds pernicious views. The left believe that right-wingers just blindly fall into the propaganda of the rich, and support capitalist policies that are bad for them. Or, in the case of woke leftists, they believe that the right-wingers are brainwashed servants of the power structure that controls us. The right believe that leftists are brainwashed by woke academia and media, and have thus become anti-democratic. Or, in the case of the far right, that the left-wingers are brainwashed servants of the Jews. And so, to save democracy, both sides veer towards increasingly extreme measures to fight against the danger represented by the other side, and end up corroding democracy from within. To change course, start by realizing that there is just as much wisdom and knowledge on the other side of the political divide. If the other side seems ignorant and stupid to you, it is because they don't know much about the things that matter to you. You are just as ignorant and stupid about the things that matter to them. Talk to them, listen to them, and educate yourself. I think the fall of wokeness in the US means that the American democracy is safe. In time, this will get the right to moderate as well, and get rid of the far-right elements that infiltrated its discourse during the fight against wokeness. The rest of the Western world will hopefully follow. And we are then going to have to let it go, and realize that whatever anti-democratic actions were carried out during this period, on either side, were carried out not because the other side wanted to overthrow democracy, but because they believed that's the only way to save democracy. Blame the crisis, not the other side, and rise above the grudges. 3. Our values are Western values, so we should defend the West. This is specifically about overcoming the harm that wokeness has done to the left. Wokeness emerges out of Western values, but it is so dumb that it claims that those values are actually universal values, the values we all naturally hold, and the West is actually the thing that prevents these values from prevailing. When they talk about patriarchy, or whiteness, or the other made-up power structures, they are actually talking about Western culture, and so the logical conclusion of their thought is destroying Western culture. Of course, doing that will actually bring down all the values they claim to believe in. All the things that the West brought to the world, democracy, human rights, end of slavery, end of colonialism, racial equality, women's rights, LGBT rights, etc., are all rooted in Western culture, are all the result of the meeting between Greco-Roman and Judeo-Christian thought. As we wake up from woke, we must return to the conviction that Western culture must be upheld and cultivated, as it is the basis of our values and ideals. 4. There are anti-freedom forces exploiting Western freedoms. This is another thing we must internalize. The world has grown smaller. It is a global ant colony where everyone is in everyone else's business. Anti-freedom forces from outside the West are worried, correctly, that Western freedoms threaten their power, beckoning their people to revolt. Therefore, they are exploiting Western freedoms to try to mess up the works in democratic countries, destroy them from within. This is a danger that must be fought, and fighting it might require us to put limitations on some of our freedoms. This is a reality that we must accept, as long as the danger persists. There are people, on both the left and the right, who point to cases when human rights are being impinged upon in democracies, and claim that this proves that democracy is a sham. This is a gross misunderstanding of how things work. There is always a clash between different human rights, and it is impossible to fully respect them. The challenge is to find the right balance that ensures maximum rights. Right now, to defend our democracy, Western governments might have to be more authoritarian. A left-wing criticism of them should not attack them for that, but inquire whether the level of authoritarianism is justified. For instance, the American government now wants to block TikTok, claiming it is used by the Chinese for nefarious purposes, endangering the American people. I am very unhappy about this development. Taking a TikTok's creator account away is not just harming their livelihood, it is destroying an identity that they spent years building and cultivating. Taking that away is extremely cruel. But I also understand that the threat the Americans are reacting to is real. If you are an American leftist and you want to challenge your government on this issue, you should do so by first acknowledging the threat. 5. Free speech. One of the biggest crimes committed by the woke is the attack on freedom of speech. Language is the domain where they believe the revolution should occur. This is the biggest difference between them and previous revolutionaries, who wanted to change the governing or economic systems, tangible things, in order to better society. The woke don't have any solutions when it comes to preferable forms of government or economy. They believe that if we just change the language, adopt a language that doesn't support the ruling structure, people's minds will be freed, revert to thinking in a truly equal way, and then the correct system will naturally emerge. Thus, they started to police language to a ridiculous extent, and tried to ruin the lives of anyone who showed any transgression from the correct language that they dictated. It was a truly dark period in America, and it still goes on elsewhere. A post-woke left should do a 180 and go back to staunch support of freedom of speech. We should free speech actively, beginning with culture. No more cancelling people for using the wrong words, no more policing of jokes, no more censoring of social media posts, etc. There are of course limits, and those are the limits that we always agreed on. No incitement for violence against someone, no libel, etc. There is no reason to change those limits. Finally, we should go for the actual anti-speech laws that the woke managed to pass, like laws banning hate speech. Hate is a primary and important human emotion and should not be banned. As long as there is no actual incitement to harm the hated group or individual, it should be allowed. We should also get rid of the idea that speech is wrong if it makes someone feel unsafe. Living in a diverse society implies that you will never be completely safe, and it is upon you to learn to live with it. If free speech makes you feel unsafe or hurts your feelings, it's your problem. If you can't cope with it, then you are the problem. 6. There is no longer systemic or cultural oppression. There was a time when the system, meaning the laws, the institutions, the schools, the public spaces, actually treated the different groups of citizens differently, creating systemic oppression. This time ended, in the West, in the 1960s. Then the left battled against cultural oppression. That is, prejudices, cultural norms, and irrational fears that doomed some groups to have lesser chances of social success. The Obama years marked a successful end to those battles, and there's no longer any cultural oppression in the West either. However, many individuals within the formerly oppressed groups fell in love with their victimhood, or even found ways to benefit from it, and couldn't let it go. Wokeness gave them a way to keep it alive by inventing imaginary systems of oppression. But victimhood is a form of disability, which leads to misery. Adopting a victim mentality, while not actually being a victim, is a form of self-inflicted harm, which should never be condoned. The left, in recent times, is guilty of encouraging this imaginary victimhood. This has to change. It's not that the democratic system is perfect and harbors no injustices and prejudices. Since society is dynamic, we must always be on the lookout for new injustices and prejudices that are being formed, and make the necessary adjustments. Wokeness sinned by treating victimhood as something that is predestined, something which only certain groups can suffer from, when in fact, any group can be the victim. Therefore, the battle must be fought from the position of caring for the entire society. No more believing that you are part of a group that society wants to oppress, and therefore you should care only about your group and fight against society. Understand that Western society is committed to equal rights and opportunities for everyone, and that you should work within the system to get it done. There are great challenges ahead, social problems that will surely arise due to the radical changes brought about by new technologies. Focus on those, and free your mind of the identity battles of the previous century. 7. There is an answer to the question, what is a woman? There is one exception to the previous point, and that is the transgendered people. We have yet to solve all the philosophical and medical problems that arise from the existence of transgenders, and as a result, they still have a hard time finding their place in society. At least one problem, however, does have a solution, and that is the question if trans men are men, and, more urgently, if trans women are women. In recent years, this problem has come in the form of the question, what is a woman? This simple question is actually one of the things that destroy the left more than any other. It arises because on the one hand, leftists want to give support to the way transgenders define themselves, and believe that this means that you can never ever, under any circumstances, deny the womanhood of trans women. But on the other hand, they realize that the positive answer harms women, encroaches on their right to define themselves, and have their own spaces. And so, they have no answer, and leave it to the woke extremists on both sides, that is, the woke feminists and the woke trans activists, to tear the left apart with their extremism. This inability to answer stems from a common misunderstanding of how language works. People believe that in order for language to function, every word must have a clear definition, which applies in any case. In fact, philosophers have shown that such a language would not function. In order for language to function, it actually has to be flexible, and every word must have multiple definitions. There is no such thing as a definition of a word that applies for every single case. But there is such a thing as the correct meaning of a word in every particular case. In every case, the meaning of a word is derived from the context in which it is used. So, for instance, two of the most common definitions of the word woman are A. An adult human female, and B. Someone who looks and acts in mostly feminine ways. We understand which meaning is used by the context in which it is used. When we talk about that woman there, we don't first go over and check out her biology. We go off on the way she looks and acts, and everyone understands who we are talking about, because they see someone who looks and acts in a feminine way. But when we talk about women's sports, we mean women in the sense of adult human females. And in that case, we actually do make sure that the contestants are biologically female. And so, in the first case, a trans woman is a woman, while in the second case, she is not a woman. Once you learn to think like that, the question what is a woman has a clear answer in each individual case. The role of the left, in the coming years, should be to first of all internalize this answer, and then spread it to the rest of society. For those who want to understand this answer more, check out the videos I made on this issue. 8. Communism is bad, and Marxism is bullshit. It's ridiculous that the specter of communism is still a thing, even though it isn't really haunting anymore. It just festers, mainly in the academy, and occasionally infects the mind of some poor youngster and ruins their life. When you point out to them how many times communism was tried and ended in total disaster, the answer is always, it wasn't real communism. Well, history shows that communism was always a disaster precisely because this is what the communists always told themselves, and this time they were determined to do it right. And each time they did it precisely by the book, and because of it, it always ended in catastrophe. Marxism also lingers on, long after it has been debunked in every possible way. Thankfully, it seems that Marxists no longer believe in Marxist theory of history, but many of them still hold on to the labor theory of value. Scholars of Marx will probably jump at this and point out that Marx was actually not a proponent of this theory. But I am not arguing against Marx here. I am arguing against the self-proclaimed Marxists I encounter online and in academia. And they are definitely pushing it. I would even say that this is their main, and arguably only, talking point. In the 19th century, this theory at least made sense. It long since stopped making sense, yet professors still poison young minds with it. According to this theory, and I am making it crude because this is what I hear from those professors, the value of the labor done by the worker is determined by how much they add to the value of the raw materials used in the product. So if the raw materials cost the employer $100 and he sold the end product for $500, it means that the labor of the worker is worth $400, and this is what they should get paid by the employer. Otherwise, it is exploitation, the mark of an oppressive society that should be overthrown by a communist revolution. It should be noted that the working conditions of the proletariat in Marx's time were horrific, and he was reacting to true suffering. But now they are much better, there is no more suffering, and workers generally don't feel exploited. So the Marxists, desperate to keep their revolutionary dream alive, cling on to the labor theory of value, to claim that workers today are even more exploited, since the disparity between the wealth they produce and the salaries they make is much greater than it was back then. When this theory was presented in the middle of the 19th century, it made sense. Technology advanced slowly in those days. The employer, the capitalist, was someone who had money and could therefore build a factory, buy raw materials, and hire workers to turn those materials into product. He didn't have to invent the product. He didn't have to slave for years on making it marketable. He didn't have to take all the risks involved in dedicating your life to developing a product that may or may not sell. He didn't have to remain on top of the changes in technology that would require adjusting the product. He didn't have to always come up with new ways to market the product. He didn't have to be careful lest his private life soil the name of the product. He wasn't obliged to constantly tend to the workers' welfare. He didn't have to do all the other things that employers today do. So the theory made some sense back then, but is completely incompatible with the reality of today. Yet Marxists still talk like the employer doesn't work at all, and all the wealth is generated by the worker. Let's put the labor theory of value to the 21st century test. Supposing a worker in the Tesla factories slacks on their job. How much will it cost the company? Close to nothing, even in the worst case scenario. Now, supposing Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla, starts slacking and makes bad decisions as a result. How much will that cost the company? It could cost them up to tens of billions of dollars. So, going by the Marxist theory, it means that the workers' labor is worth peanuts, while Musk's labor is worth billions. Right? And then there's another thing to consider, which is the labor of the machine. Since the time of Marx, we went through automatization, computerization, and now AI. The machines today do 99% of the work. The human worker doesn't add much value. In actuality, the vast majority of workers today get paid a lot more than the value that they add to their company. So why does the company pay them so much? Well, mainly because many people out there are dysfunctional wrecks, and therefore make terrible workers, and since no company wants to have terrible workers, it has to pay decent workers good money, lest they go elsewhere. In other words, the value of the workers' labor, fortunately for the workers, is determined by the forces of the market, not by how much value they add to the product. We can talk about how bad it is that human labor has been devalued so, and try to find solutions, but we will not find any solutions within the Marxist framework. 9. Nation-state and democracy are dependent on each other. This problem originated long before woke. After the atrocities of the two world wars, many came to the conclusion that the problem is that humanity is divided into nations, and we should therefore work to dissolve the national identity of each state. This, however, is simply going to a polar opposite that is just as bad. A nation-state can indeed become bad when it adopts the belief that its nation is superior to others, and therefore should conquer and rule them, or when it develops an exclusive mindset that believes not everyone can belong to the nation, and those citizens who don't should have lesser rights. But there's no inevitability this should happen, and the democratic nation-state is still the best of all systems. In actuality, nation-state and democracy are dependent on each other. A nation-state can exist only if the government is democratic. Otherwise, the sovereign is not the nation, but a despot. And democracy can exist only in a nation-state. Only a society that has a strong shared identity can withhold the difference of opinion that is the essence of democracy. The goal should be a society in which democracy and the nation-state are held in equal regard, and safeguard each other. Unfortunately, because anti-nationalism became so strong in recent decades, those who defended nationalism were branded as extreme right-wingers. And now that people are waking up to the dangers of anti-nationalism, and nationalism is back, it allows nationalists with anti-democratic ideas to enter the public sphere, because we have a hard time telling them apart from democratic nationalists. This should be solved by both left and right reaffirming their belief in nation-state and democracy. The left should attend to the democratic side, pushing for the national identity to become more inclusive and diverse, while the right should fight to uphold the values of the nation. The anti-liberal extremists, aka the woke and the Nazis, will then just fade away. 10. Anti-Zionism is bigotry. Speaking of nation-states, the Jewish nation, one of the oldest nations in the world, has its own democratic nation-state, in Israel. But many on the left are opposed to this very idea. This goes further than their attack on other nation-states. When Israel is concerned, many leftists are frothing at the mouth with their hatred of it. Why is that? The answer, of course, is very long, and I made some videos about it. The gist of it is this. The Jewish nation was exiled from its country by the Romans, but the Jews kept holding on to their national identity, waiting to go back to their land of Israel. Alas, two powerful religions arose, out of the loins of their main religion, that prevented them from doing so. Both the Catholic Church and the Muslim religion defined themselves as the new chosen people, and because of that, it was imperative for them to show that God had forsaken the Jews. And so they kept the Jews in exile, and in a wretched condition, for almost 2,000 years. The Jews, however, never gave up. They kept passing down, from generation to generation, the idea that they are a nation, that their homeland is Israel, and that one day they will return and be sovereign again. In the 20th century, they finally managed to achieve their dream, but there are many who still refuse to accept it. The entire worldview of the Catholics and the Muslims, their entire identity, is being threatened by the mere existence of a Jewish state. The Catholics basically came to terms with it, although many of them still find it hard, which is the reason why countries like Ireland and Spain are so hostile to Israel. The Muslims, meanwhile, haven't budged at all, and have been waging war to destroy the reality of Jewish sovereignty for over 100 years. And, for some reason, they find enthusiastic allies in the Western left. Why is the left so anti-Zionist? Zionism is the most amazing story of anti-imperialism and anti-colonialism. A nation that was occupied, colonized, exiled, oppressed, and degraded, and yet managed to liberate itself against all odds. Shouldn't the left champion it? They should, but there are many forces that completely subverted the left on this issue. First, there's the underlying traditional Christian hostility. Then, there's all the anti-Western forces that believe bringing Israel down will be the first domino to bringing the West down. Then there's the attempt to use the Jews to scrub the Western conscience clean about its past colonialism. So the Jews are portrayed as white people who are alien to the region and colonizing the natives. Furthermore, Israel is a proud nation-state, showing how to perfectly balance nationalism and democracy, and so a problem for the anti-nationalist movement. Finally, of course, there's anti-Semitism, which always lurks in the background. This particular bigotry had some very serious repercussions. As Israelis and Palestinians were having peace talks based on the two-state solution, the Western left turned aggressively against this solution and started to push for the destruction of Israel. This was one of the main reasons why the Palestinians turned against the two-state solution as well, causing the peace process to collapse. The results of that are nightly on your TV screens. To achieve their goal, the anti-Zionist forces are running a decades-long project in the academy and the media designed to demonize Israel and Zionism. It has several fronts. First, to deny Jewish identity and portray it as a religious identity, not a national one. Secondly, to misrepresent the nature of Israel and portray it as an illiberal state. Third, to portray the Palestinian nation, a nation that came to be only in the 1970s, at the earliest, as a nation that existed for centuries and had its land stolen by the Jews. Fourth, to claim that Jews lived peacefully under Muslim rule, something that was never true. And finally, to rewrite the history of the Jewish-Arab conflict and portray the indigenous Jews as the colonizers and the colonizing Arabs as the dispossessed indigenous people. Many leftists have grown into this web of lies and wholeheartedly believe it, so they come to hate Israel. In the worst cases, it leads them to believe that Jews must be controlling their government, which is the only way they can explain why their country is supporting such a wicked state. And so they fall back to Nazi antisemitism. Thus, the anti-Zionism of the left becomes a gateway, sending youngsters into the arms of the extreme right. Anti-Zionism is a cancer of the left, a cancer that goes back before wokeness. The left can never heal itself as long as it doesn't take care of this disease. 11. Islam is incompatible with the values of the West. With the undermining of the nation-state came the idea that states should simply be democracies in which many different cultures coexist peacefully. Indeed, most people who immigrate to democratic countries want to be part of their democracy and successfully integrate. But there is one group that, at least in the foreseen future, cannot integrate. Islam is incompatible with liberal values, and the influx of Muslim immigrants into democratic countries, especially in Europe, is threatening their future. It is a reality that we must acknowledge. True, many Muslims who immigrate to the West do want to become Westerners. But they also want to maintain the Muslim faith, not realizing it cannot work. Wherever a Muslim community exists, there's a significant minority among them who hold jihadist views, believing their mission in life is to impose Islam on the whole world, and they are willing to use any means necessary to achieve it. The way they operate is to first terrorize the Muslim community, murder and mutilate those who don't adhere to Islamic law, until they get everyone to comply. Once they have all Muslims under their thumb, they start doing the same to non-Muslims. The left's reaction to this threat was to hold on to the old belief that non-Western cultures inevitably end up integrating in their society, citing past examples. Hence, they brand anyone who warns about the threat a bigot, as if there cannot be a case that is different. The case of Islam is different, and the left needs to face it. The people are beginning to wake up to it, and the right wing is already pushing for strong anti-Muslim measures, often without even distinguishing between Muslims and ex-Muslims. The left should be more humane and discerning, but must first acknowledge the problem. 12. The world is not ready yet for a global society. Along with those anti-national sentiments came the idea of a global society. The world is going through globalization processes, in many ways, and some want to actively create global institutions and programs that will lead to a global society. However, the globe is still made of cultures that are incompatible with one another, and cannot be united. The globalists envision a liberal global society, but their globalization efforts are currently being exploited by anti-liberal forces to undermine the West. Forget about the globalist dreams, for now, and focus instead on strengthening your democratic nation-state. On the international level, build institutions with countries that share your values and goals. If there will be a liberal global society one day, it will happen in a slow bottom-up process, not by top-down programs. 13. Respect the other side's view on abortion. This is relevant mainly to America, but might become an issue in other Western countries as well. The argument on the morality of abortions cannot be settled, because it is dependent on one question: is the fetus a living human? And this question cannot be definitively answered, because it is predicated on a metaphysical question, namely, the question of what is life. Everyone answers this question according to the metaphysics they believe in, and there is no way for us humans to determine which metaphysics is the true one. In such matters, we have no choice but to agree to disagree, and respect the other side's position and sensibilities. The American left, in recent years, sinned by not respecting the sensibilities of the pro-life camp, not caring that they regard abortion as murder. Drunk on their power, woke feminists turned abortion into something that should be celebrated, something that should be championed for ideological reasons. The American public, that generally supports the legality of abortions, was abhorred by this behavior, and the pro-choice camp lost support, eventually leading to the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Beware of this happening again. It starts by understanding that the other side's position is valid as well. These are the main points, as I see them. I regard my position as leftism that takes reality into account, that sees humans as they are, not as they ought to be. I will probably be accused of just going back to old liberalism. Well, you haven't shown me anything better. All the left-wing alternatives you presented prove to be astronomically worse.